Want to continue spooky season after the 31st? Would you like to dive deeper into the world of the paranormal, the occult, cryptozoology, and other unexplainable topics? Then the Strange Realities Conference is the right one for you. Live and online in Nashville, Tennessee, November 1st and 2nd at SIR Nashville, and November 3rd online only. Strange Realities Conference 2024 will feature presentations by Tim Banal, Nathan Isaac, Kendall Lackey, Brent Rains, Micah Hanks, Ren Collier, Joshua Cutchin, Recluse, Nevaeh Terry, and Steve Berg as your Master of Ceremonies. Online with presentations by Soraya Ascath, Timothy Renner, Katie Andrews, Robert Guffey, Greg Bishop, and Becky Ann Galentine. Tickets are $70 in person the whole weekend or $30 online and are available at strangerealitiesconference.com. Don't miss this amazing opportunity to learn from some of the best spooktacular minds in the field of the paranormal.
All right. Welcome to Conspirinormal, guys. Welcome back. We are slowly gearing up for this year's Strange Realities Conference. And it is September, so I guess, we're getting into kind of like the spooky season time now as we approach fall. And we're going to talk about some ghost stories tonight with our first-time guest, Liz Z Pardue. So welcome,
Hi.
Liz. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Conspirinormal. Yeah, thanks for coming. You're good friends. We were kind of talking in the pre-show banter about this. Like, you're good friends with my friend Heather.
Yep.
It's also a friend of the show who's been on the show several times now. Heather's been around kind of since the beginning of Conspirinormal back in like 2012. So that's how long I've been doing this now.
Oh, nice.
And,
yeah. I've known Heather for more than 20 years now that I'm doing the math on that. So she remembers a very feral version of me. That's for a different.
Gotcha. Well, you have a book out. It's called Fuquay Varina, Ghosts, Legends, and Lore, Volume 1. So I guess there'll be a Volume 2 at some point.
Yeah, we've already got a dozen stories locked in for Volume 2 that we just didn't get a chance to button up by the time we wanted to go to press on this one. So we're like, you know what? Let's make this a series because we keep getting more stories all the time and wanted to leave it open.
Okay, yeah. I could definitely tell that there was probably a lot more going on. This seems to be like a kind of haunted little town in, I think it's like south of Raleigh, right?
We are 15 miles door to door from here to downtown Raleigh.
Okay. So of course, I never heard of this place, but I guess I'm not from the region. So, but I kind of I want to talk about you a little bit and like your fascination with the paranormal, where it kind of comes from, and some of kind of the work that you've done, and now going into doing this kind of like business that you got going on with there at Fuquay Varina. So let's kind of talk about you a little bit before we get into some of the stories.
All right. Yeah, I am from North Carolina. My family has been in North Carolina for a few hundred years now. I'm a scaredy cat, which is why this is particularly funny that I love ghost stories so much. I think that microdosing thrill, scaring myself was a way to like microdose a mental shift as a young child, and I got addicted to it. But I actually do have an origin story about how I got into lore specifically. So when I was little, my mom took us to the library a bunch. And when she was there, she's like, hey, there's a book by a local author named Nancy Roberts, who wrote a bunch of anthologies of North Carolina legends and ghost stories in the 1960s. And her first anthology book came out in 1962. It's called Ghosts and Legends of the Old North State. And my mom asked, can we take this book home? And they said, no, you can't. It's a first edition. They've been out of print for 20 years at this point. This was in the 80s. And so my mom stood there and Xeroxed the entire book for us, and so we could bring it home, because the first story in that book is called The Witch of Big Lick, and her great great grandmother was a featured player in the book, and I read it when I was 8 years old. And in the story, my fourth great grandmother is in the room with this woman that everybody in the town in Big Lake, North Carolina, which is, as we would say, not but as big as a minute. It's literally like an intersection with a thrift store and a Citgo station. It's nothing, but
Not much there, yeah.
no, not anything. Blink and you miss it when you're driving through it. And uh, in the story, this woman has terrorized the town, and everybody thinks she's a witch, and she's dying. And my fourth great grandmother's in the room and sees a shadow run at her and leap up on the bed next to the witch's face. And the witch, looks at my grandmother and says, "Don't be afraid. It's just the devil come for my soul." And then she dies. And I read that when I was 8, and I was like, oh, somebody in my family is in a book having been in the room with the devil himself. This is the most terrifying and thrilling thing I've ever experienced. And I've been chasing that high ever since. And then my mom helped me collect all of Nancy Roberts' books, and I wanted to know every bit of folklore from where I lived. And it's how I got into history, is through folklore, because it's a cultural thing, and it's oral still, man, cut this part. Oral storytelling is most of our living history, and is a thing that we're losing. And anyway, that's kind of how I got into it. And now whenever I travel, I ask anybody to tell me their ghost story. I've been in Ubers and I've told people, like, hey, this is what I do. What have you experienced? No matter where I am. I'll ask tour guides anywhere. I'll ask Uber drivers anywhere. I'll ask anybody I'm sitting with at a bar, like, hey, what have you seen? And people are happy to share when they know that I'm kind of safe for it. And yeah, that's been my entry point and my trajectory of that.
Have you ever had the phenomenon with people when you ask them? Because I kind of doing this show, I'll ask that question often for some people, especially to get to know them. And it's like, have you ever had any kind of like paranormal experience? And they'll be like, well, no, not really, but there was this one time. And then they'll tell you like the most amazing paranormal
Yes.
experience
Yep.
anybody's ever had.
Yep. It happens all the time. I'm sorry. I have my cat being obnoxious, and can you hear the crackling?
No.
Okay. Sorry. Um, yeah. Somebody will be like, yeah, I don't really believe in that. This happened once when I was a story scout for, I don't know if you've heard of KQED's Spooked podcast through Snap Judgment.
Yeah.
And it was a story scout for them. And I talked to a guy who was like, I don't really believe in all this. And then he told me the most terrifying story I've ever heard. And he had been haunted by a cryptid that he encountered when he was training in Jacksonville, North Carolina for the Marines. And then he has been haunted by death ever since. Like, everybody in his unit died in a thing that he was able to escape, and his whole family died, and including his children. And like, he earnestly believes this because he ran into this deer man cryptid in the swamps of North Carolina back in the early 90s. But then in the next breath, he was like, yeah, but that's kind of it. I don't think you need more than that, sir.
It's a boring, dull story. You don't
Yeah,
want to hear it.
and then
Yeah.
in the next breath he was like, but I don't believe in it. You know what I mean? I was like, no, I don't know what you mean. Please
Yeah.
explain to me what. And he's like, yeah, I don't believe in that kind of stuff.
It's like, how could you not believe in it after something like that
You
happens to
just
you?
told me a 30-minute story about a thing that's affected your whole life.
I wonder
And
if it's like I've heard that before too, and I wonder if it's like a cognitive dissonance type of thing where
I think
people
it,
are just like they cannot square it with their like normal, mundane, everyday reality, and therefore it's like, well, I'll just compartmentalize that somewhere, and you know, I'll pull it out as a great story, but I don't really. I'll just deny that that really happened and not have to really think about it.
right, which is such a strange approach to telling me a story that you commit to the narrative of and then are able
Yeah.
to say, but I don't believe it. So when you believe it enough to keep telling the story, I'm not going to
Well,
debate somebody's reality with them.
right, right.
But words
But
mean things.
I wonder if like religion has something to do with that because people sometimes, especially in the South, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
people are big into, church in every corner of the Bible Belt. And I wonder if people are just like, because that doesn't quite fit with what I'm supposed to believe, then it's that compartmentalization happens
Yeah, like they want to
like
make
that.
sure they've covered their, like they verbally covered their tracks. So
Right.
that they're like, yeah, yeah, this thing happened, but it's not, I don't want to get kicked out of my church for saying that this thing happened.
Yeah.
To,
Yeah. So, and they feel probably safe with you because you're into this stuff and like they probably don't tell it to too many people.
I hear
So,
that a lot. I hear that
yeah.
like, all right, well, I've never told anybody this, but you won't tell anybody. And the truth is I won't unless somebody gives me permission. I just like collecting stories.
Right. What, we should ask you really what's a paranormal experience that you've personally had?
I didn't start having paranormal experiences until after I became a parent, which was really strange.
Okay.
Um, I've always been a fraidy cat, and so I never was seeking it out. Whenever my friends were like, "Let's go to a haunted house, real or, manufactured," I was like, "No, thank you. I'd rather, me and my anxiety just hang out at home. Thanks." Um, but the first thing that I ever experienced happened when my child was about 9 or 10 months old. They were at the age where they were able to start cruising, where they would hold on to things and they could walk, but they weren't walking freely yet.
Mhm.
And my then husband was working for a publishing company where the owner asked everybody in the company to help her clean out this warehouse that she had. And they were kind of just throwing things away, but if somebody wanted something, they could take it with them. And so she had this amazing steamer trunk that was so old, like the leather handles that dry rotted, but it still had stickers on it from, I mean, decades and decades before. And um, my spouse was like, "Oh, that's amazing. Can we take it to, use it as a coffee table?" And she said, "Sure." And he brought it home and we kind of just shoved it in a corner behind a table in our dining room. We had this big open floor plan where there was a dining room on one side, and then in the middle of the room, we had a couch that would bisect that big open floor space, and it would be facing the opposite wall where we had a television. And in front of the couch was where we had my kids' little area that she would kind of crawl and creep around in. Creeping sounds creepier than it means to be, but anyway, we also had a cat at the time who was 4, who was really chilled out cat, never violent, never reactionary. And shortly after we brought the trunk home, both the cat and the baby started staring over. When I would sit on the couch, they would start staring over my shoulder and freaking out at something behind me. And when I
Mhm.
would turn around, I couldn't see anything because the trunk was obscured by the dining room table and the chairs. So I would turn around and not see anything, and my child would be in front of me just screaming and tears. And she was 9 months old, and I thought like, okay, maybe it's gas or whatever. And then later, when my kid would be taking a nap, our cat would be standing there in full Halloween cat pose, and I would turn around and not see anything and didn't know what was going on. And this went on for like a couple weeks. And I don't know, when you're a new parent, you're sort of oblivious and you're just sort of putting out one fire after the other and you're not connecting dots on things. And one night I was
Sure.
laying down and we woke up in the middle of the night and we heard what sounded like rustling shopping bags, plastic shopping bags in the kitchen. And I was like, oh, the cat's gotten into something. And then I noticed that the cat was at the foot of the bed. And I stand up and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, there's somebody in the house. And I grab my phone and I run across the hall to where my kid is. And I send my then husband to the kitchen to where the sound is coming from. And I am like I open the window. We're on the ground floor. I open the window and I am fully prepared to hear him fighting somebody and like I'm gonna grab the baby and tuck and roll out the window. Like, no offense, but if it's a choice between like going to fight somebody who has intruded our house in the middle of the night or protecting my kid, I was like, all right, I'm prepared to call 911 and just get out of here. And he comes about 5 minutes later, he comes back and he's like, there's nobody in the house. And I was like, you heard that, right? And he's like, yeah. And we couldn't figure out what it was, but I'm a fraidy cat. If something scary happens, I'm gonna be up all night. And I went to my room and I'm pacing and I'm panicking, and he goes right to sleep because his stress response is just to like power down. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting there, and we had a bay window right next to our bed, and I saw a flash of a bluish whitish light come from outside. Now, the problem is our blinds were drawn. And so to this day, in the moment, it looked like it came through the blinds or around the cracks in the blinds, but there weren't any cracks in the blinds. And also, if it had been a person, that person would have had to be like holding that light up by 14 feet in order for it to come down at the angle that it did. But the minute I saw that light, my whole body became calm and it was like nothing happened, and I went right to bed. And so the next morning,
Hmm.
we're like, hey, that was super weird. Like, completely brushed off this thing that happened. And I fed my kid. I'm standing at the sink. I can see a view of the whole house or of the whole living area. And all of a sudden, kids start screaming. And I look over to where her eye line is. And I can see that she's looking above where the trunk is, and there are some shelves there, and we had some salad spoons at the back of the shelf up against the wall there were two wine bottles, and the salad spoons slid all the way forward, like past the wine bottles, and dropped onto the trunk. And then the room got very, very, very hot and stuffy, like I was having trouble breathing. And um I realized like, oh, there's something in the trunk, and I just grabbed my kid. I got out of there. I went, and I had a friend who understood these sort of things and was spiritual, and she was like, I mean, you can sprinkle it with some like holy water or whatever, or you can just like drag it to the curb. And we dragged it to the curb, and we never saw it again. We dragged it to the curb for trash pickup, but somebody picked it up by that evening. And that was the first paranormal experience that I have ever had. And then I started having them about every other year or so. I'll have something that happens. I've had things that have happened in the Outer Banks. I've had a few things that have happened here in this house. I've had none of them were invited. Yes, I protect myself. Yes, I do cleansings, but like I've had some things.
Yeah. Do you think that like being involved in doing this and like, I'm writing this book and, being so immersed in this lore and some of these stories, do you think that contributes to that?
I don't know, because I've always been the kind of person who, like, even as a kid, if we were sitting around at a sleepover, I was gonna tell ghost stories and ask people's ghost stories.
Yeah.
And I've always read local ghost story anthologies that I've picked up at any gift shop across, the United States. You see those in every like Cracker Barrel and gift shop. Um and I don't know. I had a medium once, a medium that came to examine my neighborhood, who said like, "Oh, you're able to see things because of your kid." And that happened like 4
Interesting.
years ago. And that was the first time I ever connected the dots. Like, oh, I never had anything happen after I became a parent. I don't know why that is, but
It's interesting. Yeah, one of the things that you said kind of struck me when you said when you saw the light and that you got this feeling of calm and you went to sleep. And that's like a common thing
yep,
in paranormal encounters that I've noticed. I mean, I
yeah.
myself had an experience where I saw an old lady apparition when I was like 7 years old, and like I just like went to sleep, and that was my reaction. I've had other people say that exact same thing. So I find that interesting, and I don't know. That's one of those things that's like it baffles you because you'd think you'd be hyper alert and aware, but it's like the phenomena just kind of does the exact opposite to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's almost like something primal in our system like gets hijacked.
Yeah. Or the nature of the phenomena shuts it down itself,
Yeah.
possibly.
Yep.
Um, so let's talk about Fuquay Varina. I'm assuming I'm saying that right. Um,
Close enough.
so this
Get
is a
against
town
Fuquay
I
Varina, but eh.
yeah. Well, Heather was telling me she's like apparently that like, it's a big thing to go to Fuquay Varina, but um, so the unique name, first of all, that it's a hyphenated name, and so that tells might tell a little bit about its history. Um, like how old is this town? And just like a little kind of like sketch about it, like what you know what kind of town that it is, and why it's got that weird hyphenated name.
Oh, so Fuquay Varina is named after the Fuquay family that quote unquote settled here in the 1860s. And the reason the town was put on the map is because it was all farmland, it was all unincorporated, but the Fuquays happened upon after they ran the indigenous people out of town and, started setting up shop, which of course there's not a lot of recorded history about the indigenous peoples, but there are a lot of rumors and speculation. Anyway, the Fuquays, Stephen and Davy Crockett Fuquay, father son, had a field right here, and I'm pointing like your listeners can see me pointing, which um
All good.
they had this farm and they found a mineral spring in one of the fields while they were plowing. And there was a tree nearby. They hung a gourd up on the tree and people started drinking from the fountain or from the mineral spring. And what they noticed is that ailments that they'd been struggling with stopped plaguing them after they'd started partaking of the waters. And word started spreading about the healing properties of this mineral spring. And so people started coming here. It's a thing that put us on the map in the late 1800s. And it's why we built a train station that led right to Fuquay Springs. And so originally the town was Fuquay Springs just because people were coming here and a lot of hotels popped up. In fact, I am currently in one of the old hotels that popped up so that it could facilitate tourists coming to take the waters of the mineral spring because people believed it had mystical healing properties. And in fact, there are pictures of people um, down by the spring. There are pictures of piles of crutches that people abandoned after they'd, taken the waters of the spring. And people would come and spend, a week here and find relief for any number of ailments. Now, a lot of this is probably, societal pressure and just the societal phenomenon that happens whenever you're part of a group experience. And then the other thing is that North Carolina has the largest lithium deposit in the world. And so all of our groundwater naturally has trace amounts of lithium in it. So people would be prescribed weeks of coming down to North Carolina for respiratory illnesses. They'd come here, they'd breathe their super humid air with our lush, dense foliage, because we're only like 2 inches away from being a rainforest or something like that. And they'd also drink our wonderful, pure, lithium-laced water, and they'd feel amazing after a week. And so they'd go back home and say that they were healed when really they basically were just living in an outdoor spa for a week and resting and relaxing. But the mystical healing spring became a hot spot that people would flock to. And at one point, we had something like 4 or 5 massive hotels along the main drag. And um, there are conflicting stories about how the Varina side became named as such, but the story that I heard was that one of the Fuquay descendants was in the Civil War, and there used to be women who would write to soldiers to keep morale up. And one woman began writing to Somebody Fuquay. I really should know this. It's in the book. Just read the book. Um, and this is one of those like hotly contested stories, but basically her name was Virginia, and he either couldn't read her signature or just thought it would be cute to call her Verena. And when the war was
Interesting.
over, he asked her to marry him. He said, I will name half of my family's land Verena. Women love free land and free houses. I am one. I understand these things. And so she said, yes, absolutely. And so there was a train station in Fuquay Springs and there was a train station in Varina. And so in the 1960s, those two towns finally merged. But for a long time, we weren't really townships so much as we were just train stations. And then the post offices would set up near the train station so people would just send their mail to that area.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a very complicated story.
Yeah. So it was like two towns at first, and then they just kind of combined into
Yeah,
one.
and they wanted to compete with Winston-Salem as a tobacco Twin Cities, North Carolina town.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, so is it kind of like this like little has it been kind of like a little vacation spot and like a little place like people can get away from like Raleigh or whatever and like kind of like a
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And
It's
it competed with
historical
a lot of
buildings and such.
yes, it competed with places like the Grove Park Inn that was also popular at the same time in Asheville as part of this whole turn of the century mineral springs craze that the wealthy and also the upper middle class were getting on board with. There were a lot of these mineral spring inns across North Carolina, but I just went to one near Hanging Rock State Park, but Fuquay's was a big one in this area.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the stories. Um, and I picked, I just picked some that kind of really intrigued me.
All
We'll
right.
start off with the Valentine-Spence house.
Yeah, the portal to the underworld.
It's always good that a town has one of those.
Sure, and it's adjacent from the Mineral Spring Park. In fact, Spring Street is the most haunted street in Fuquay, and we believe that it's because, and a lot of people believe that it's because there are spiritual ley lines along that route. But the Valentine-Spence house is, I mean, a stone's throw away from the Mineral Springs Park. And we've talked to, and in the book, we don't name all of them by name, but we talked to the three last homeowners who have all owned the property since the early 90s. And all of them have had similar experiences and have confirmed that they think it's really active, which is cool.
What are some of the experiences that people have had in there?
The craziest are the pictures that we have in the book. The
Yeah.
first homeowner that I spoke to lived there in the late 80s and early 90s, and she renovated the whole house with her husband. They did the whole thing by hand, just the two of them. And her mother came to visit from London. That's where she's from originally, is England. And the mother had at one point passed away and been resuscitated and ever since then was able to pick up entities on film. And so she came with one of those cheap little Kodak disposable cameras from the early 90s and took pictures of the house to show her friends, hey, look at the renovations my daughter's been doing in this amazing Victorian style house. And when she got them developed, the letter that she still has says, we're so sorry, we don't know what happened to these 5 or 6 images because she gave us 7, but I believe we only published 5. And the pictures have full human figures in them and wisps of people. There's one picture that you can see a woman sitting at the piano playing, and you can see the color of her hair and the color of her sweater. And that was the woman who had just passed away in the house like 5 years before that. And um, just these really, really in-depth, really detailed images of humans and spirits that are seen there. And one of the things that she said was the reason they moved out of this house that they loved so much was that it was like trying to go to sleep in a train depot for the undead, like, or sorry, for the dead. She's the next homeowner said that they would watch a spirit walk through the foyer of the house and out through the back, and then they would read that person's obituary in the paper in the next few days.
Mm. Kind of like a premonition of someone's death. Yeah.
Or that they were, so the first homeowner that we interviewed believes that a portal was opened on the property. And because of this, spirits locally will exit through this place. She believes that sometimes people who die suddenly don't realize that they can go. And so they need a congregation spot or a place that feels familiar to move on. And that's what she thinks that this home has started to act as. But
Is it, it could, oh, go ahead.
she doesn't know when the portal was opened. She's not sure when um she wasn't able to access any of the history of the former homeowners and what kind of like spiritual activity they may have had, but she believes that the portal is actually in the backyard and just above the house.
You mentioned the lithium and the um, minerals, the mineral waters and the
Mhm.
springs. And, sometimes, one of the theories about hauntings is that, well, running water is part of that. But like one of the theories is just like you could be under some kind of mineral or some kind of thing. Is there has anybody ever like kind of like looked at that as a possibility of why you got so many hauntings in this little town?
The
Or that
mineral
there's a
spring.
portal, that there's a portal in the a portal in the house.
We are interested in investigating that. We haven't been able to get into the house, but we have had some mediums who have confirmed some things about the spiritual presence around the spring that we have also heard stories of that line up about just these shadowy beings being in the creek and being around the water and being part of the water. We heard a medium that I had investigate the neighborhood said, yeah, we see these shadow people in the trees and in the water. And then that turned out to be a story that was also confirmed by children of the area who told it 30 years ago. And a homeowner that I know told me just last week, she confirmed that with us. And it seems like that's the epicenter. Um, for all we know, because of the spiritualism trend of the early 1900s, in conjunction with the health trend of the
Yeah.
early 1900s, it would make sense that somebody living in this big craftsman style house across the street would have dabbled in something that would have opened up a portal at the
Mm.
house. That makes a lot of sense to me, given what I know about the spiritualism fad.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me too.
It also makes a lot of sense to me that those things were done in secret in a very, very conservatively Christian community, such as the one where
Yeah.
we live. Another thing that we write about in the book is the heavy, heavy presence of the Ku Klux Klan in this community. And we had some storytellers that shared their stories with us and said, like, under no circumstance can you tell anybody where we live or that we told this story. We don't want to be ostracized from our church community, even though this is a thing that happened to us and we had to, deal with it. We still can't talk about it. So there's a lot of different facets that would keep the truth quiet, which has been kind of frustrating. Like we believe that the story of how the Fuquay Mineral Springs came to be and how the Fuquays managed to settle on this land, we think that's been completely whitewashed. But there's no real way to prove that given the historical documents that have been left behind.
Yeah. 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 You run into, I think you run into things like that a lot of people that might be reticent to talk about some of the stuff and
Yeah.
or face the history. would be
Yeah,
another
and
thing.
people get real ouchy about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a sensitive subject, so I mean, Uh, so look, I'm looking at this at the book. Like it looks like there's a beast that lives there, and so you got a
Yeah.
chapter on the beast of Fuquay.
Yeah, so a few people have seen this beast of downtown Fuquay that is about the size of a golden retriever and has the body of like a beaver. And uh some people say that the ears look more like Dobby ears, and some people see horns like the one in the illustration. And I thought it was just my nutty neighbor, who came out and was like, Liz, I swear I seen a beast and it was eating my cat food and I made eye contact with it. And, she's a little eccentric, but I was like, oh, I'll listen to the story all day. Tell me all about it. And then I was telling somebody, like, yeah, I've got this cryptid and we're going to talk about it on the tour. And she was like, hang on, describe that to me again. And she was like, did one of my friends tell you about that? And I said, no, it was my neighbor. And she said, well, now that's weird because my friend has seen the thing you're talking about. And then I got in touch with the friend, and the friend described back to me exactly what my neighbor had said. And I thought, well, now wait a minute. Now this is something different. And um, I like that it copies itself after Alf, where it terrorizes house cats. But it seems to lurk around the downtown district. And we actually have a couple cryptids in town. We only wrote about one in this book, but we also have a Wampus cat that has written
I've
about.
I've heard about the Wampus cat. Yeah, tell me about the
Yeah.
Wampus cat.
Wampus cat is kind of an odd, like, cross between a chupacabra and a coyote and a bobcat, like kind of an amalgamation of those things. And somebody got a picture of it 14 years ago just off Purfoy Road. And a lot of people were seeing it for one summer, 12, 13 years ago. And that's all the information that we have right now. We've got a few people that are like, oh, I remember that. I'd love to talk. And then we just haven't been able to follow up. That's one of the stories that's coming in volume two, I hope. But um, we have to be really careful with um, indigenous folklore, because there's some of it, like we have a story in the book about a shapeshifter, and we were really, really careful not to call it a Wendigo, even though it
Yeah.
fits the description of a Wendigo, because Wendigo is not something that white people should know about at all. And just as somebody whose ancestors clearly came from Caucasia, um, I'm not supposed to know that about that. I mean, and also I don't want to misquote any of it, and I don't want to misrepresent any of it. And also, I'm not sure what was experienced in that shapeshifter story, so I don't want to be pulling from a different community's lore and misquoting it. It's also something that's not, the stories of Wendigo are not supposed to be spread. That's how they gain traction and power. And
Yeah,
so.
I've heard that. I've heard that with the I didn't know this until just recently, but yeah, somebody else had told me that the this was in relation to like the what's the oh man, drawing a blank, but like the one in the Southwest that's more like the kind of like Navajo the Skinwalker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that in relation to that, and then like I guess the Wendigo is kind of the more northeast kind of version of
And
that.
um and in like Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri is what I've heard as well for
Yeah.
Wendigo. And some of the details are identical in the shapeshifter, where, it preyed upon a man who was in despair and in distress. Um, but again, it's not regional to here, and it's not my story to tell, and I don't want to encroach on another nation's lore
Right.
without clarification, unless it comes from somebody of that nation. I just,
Yeah, you were saying you had the Wampus cat, and then there was another cryptid that you. you said that there was another cryptid around town.
Yeah, we
So
have
there's
the
like
beast and the
three,
wampus cat and whatever that shapeshifter
whatever
was,
that is.
the deer
Okay.
with the human eyes.
Yeah. That's definitely weird. Um,
It's a
and you
lot
also have,
of stories and a lot of cryptids for a town that's 6 square miles. Like the town
yeah.
proper is 6 square miles. It's a huge concentration of stories, and they just keep coming. And that's when we kind of thought, this seems like a lot. Maybe there's something here. And so that's when it got really exciting was when we're like, oh, now this is not just a collection. Now it's a hypothesis about a theory and a bunch of arguments that support that. And that was when it kind of took a turn.
So you also have a lady in white.
Yeah, that one's a real bummer.
What's the story there?
There was a batch of bad oxy that hit the streets about 7 years ago. And I remember Fuquay PD putting out a post on Facebook that said like, "Hey, if you know anybody who's having a hard time with opiates, please tell them not to buy anything right now because we had 8 overdoses in a week." And I remember that coming out. And one of the overdoses happened in the old Varina Hotel, which is a hotel on the other side of the town across the street from the train tracks. And um, they've been turned into apartments, and a young woman overdosed on fentanyl
Mm.
6 years ago. And there's a restaurant downstairs that's fantastic, by the way. It's great barbecue. It's Aviator Smokehouse, and they see her all the time in the area below where she passed away. And the apartment is right above this area, and they'll have messes. It's right there at the bar, and they will have electrical issues in this one spot at the bar. They'll have electrical issues with the televisions and with the computer, and they'll have weird things happen with the taps. And it's all right below where she passed away. And they will see her. Now, what's strange is this was 6 years ago. People don't normally wear nightgowns anymore, especially white ones. But they will see her in a white nightgown, running around in the back of the restaurant near the bathrooms. And then one night they had a bartender who was locking up, and she went to lock the door of the event space that is right behind the bar. It's one of the old storefronts that Aviator was able to purchase. And she locked the door, and the girl ran right up to her and was on the other side of the glass from her, like staring her dead in the eyes.
Oh my God.
Yep, just inches away. Because when we went in to ask them about it, they were like, "Oh yeah, we definitely know." She left that night, texted everybody like, "Hey, a ghost just ran up to me, and I'm gonna just leave." And they're like, "Yeah, you know what? We'll take care of it in the morning." And that's one that we can't include on a tour because it there's something about the recentness of it and the severity of it that feels really
Yeah.
disrespectful. Um, I mean, I don't know anything about her family, and we do not mention her name in the book, but we just call her a woman in white.
Well, yeah, I mean, do you have a picture of the person? And
I don't.
w was there like a confirmation? It would be interesting to see if like the person that saw the ghost confirmed,
Yeah, that was
being
one of
such a
those,
recent thing.
right. That was one of those things that we wanted to respect the privacy of the family for publication purposes. But uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and they also didn't release the victim's information publicly for privacy reasons. So
Yeah.
get that. But that was one of the chances we got to hire a local artist to do a quick sketch rendering of the event. But yeah, it would be really interesting to find out who it was specifically and see if that was the same person that everybody
Yeah.
saw downstairs. Because if it isn't, that means you've got a different ghost haunting the downstairs suddenly. And that's a can of worms. I don't know if we're
Right.
ready.
And you mentioned the nightgown thing. I mean, that would also be an interesting thing to find out. But probably you may not be able to because of the privacy reasons and because of the investigation, but whether she was wearing a nightgown when she passed away. And if not, then why is she in a being seen in a nightgown? Which does seem
Right.
like kind of an outdated thing. Um,
Right. And I do know that the old Varina Hotel had a lot of sex work happen because it was right there by the train tracks and it was on the market side of town. And even then, a woman of the evening wouldn't have worn a floor-length nightgown.
yeah,
But I don't know. I haven't seen it. It does make for an interesting story, but that is one of those that like we still live in this town, and my co-author is she works at the high school. She is one of the English teachers. She runs the newspaper there. They do a lot of things. We're not trying to make enemies of our subjects' families, and that's the thing we've been really careful of is we do change a lot of names in the book just to protect some people that are like, I'm happy to talk to you about this, but I'm not sure how much of this I want to get out. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. And same with the woman in white story is it's a delicate balance between like, all right, we really want to tell a great campfire style story as true as we can, but we also don't want to invade anybody's privacy or hurt anybody's feelings who may still be alive. We have a few stories of things that happened that are related to people who are still alive that may be not relevant to this story. That when we heard it, like we understand that some people at a local business are still hearing the ghost of, say, the husband at the business next door. And because the widow is still alive, we're like, you know what? We're just going to keep that one to ourselves for the next 20 years until she passes on too.
sure. It makes sense.
Yeah.
The yeah, like we said, like still there is that reluctance and somewhat of a stigma attached to some of these stories. And I think, being sensitive to that, I think is important.
Sure. And also, if I had lost someone that I loved, my child, my spouse, in a really, really horrific way, watching somebody else like treat it like entertainment would feel awful.
Yeah. Uh, there's also there's a story about a phantom hitchhiker. I believe
What?
it in the book.
Am I losing my mind?
Yeah, I thought there was one. Oh well, we can perhaps I'm wrong. Sergio can edit this part out. Anyway,
Is there? I don't think so.
yeah, I thought I remembered that there was like a
Oh my
or something.
God. It's the homecoming, but she's not a hitchhiker.
Right, that's what I was remembering. Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
That's
You know
it.
what's
That's it.
silly? That actually happened to me. That was my story.
Oh, yeah,
That's why when
please.
you said Phantom Hitchhiker, I was thinking like a Lydia's Bridge style, like she picked her up
Yeah.
on the way to the death, and then no, that whole thing happened to me. I said a professor in the book, but I was really just an adjunct instructor at Central Carolina Community College, and I it was
We're, we're
drizzling.
getting we're getting a scoop right here right now. I think on
Yeah,
Conspirinormal. Yeah.
this was this was in 2010. It was early, early, early spring 2010. Might have been late winter, and everything was barren. And I was taking this back then. It was a back road of just nothingness, and I was taking it to work. I worked at the Sanford Central Carolina Community College campus, and it was drizzling. I saw this girl walking on the side of the road. I three-point turned my car. I got right next to her. I leaned out the window. It was a Jetta. Just leaned over and pulled out one of the $5 umbrellas that I always carry. And I leaned it out the window, and she like looked down at me and just kind of slowly shook her head. And it was coming down pretty well, but there was also nowhere that it looked like she could have been going. It was flat. We were in the middle of tobacco fields that were completely stripped because, again, we'd just gotten through winter. And I saw that she probably had a ways to go. And she just sort of shook her head at me. And so I pulled up maybe 10 feet Another 3-point turn. When I turned around, she was completely gone. And I'll never forget, I screamed, "Oh my fucking God!" And I instinctively, like in a split second, threw my car into park, took off my seatbelt, jumped out, and was just standing there. And it's raining, and there's nowhere she could have gone. There wasn't a ditch, there wasn't a forest, there was nothing. And I was the only one out there. And you could still, like, I could still see a good ways. It wasn't pouring. Um, and she was gone. And then I just got in my car and went to work like nothing happened for the next 4 hours. And then on my way home, when I filled up my gas nearby in Duncan Junction, I kind of mentioned like, "Hey, I saw this," and that's when they told me the story of the girl that they saw or that I saw that people have seen.
What was the story behind it?
She was out at a, you know, bonfire after a football game nearby. Just she was a high school student and her boyfriend flipped his truck into when he was driving away from the bonfire on wet red clay, and so his tires got all goopy, and then when he hit the asphalt, the whole thing fishtailed because he was just kind of cut the wheel real quick and zipped out, and the whole truck flipped. And when it flipped, they landed in a puddle, and she passed. She was in the passenger seat.
And you saw her.
I sure did. And she did not
Wow.
look like a ghost at all. She looked like,
Yeah.
oh, she looked. So I went to high school in South Carolina. She looked like a bunch of the girls that I went to high school with. She had um home bleached hair, so it was that like orangey bleach job, and it was slick. It was parted straight down the middle and slicked down to a low ponytail, and she had like black roots coming out of it. She had dark black eyeliner all the way around, just like the girl who went to in high school. And then she had a puffy duck hunting camo vest, or sorry, camo coat. And then she was wearing like very tight bell bottom or like boot cut jeans that were like that lighter jean color of the late 90s ish. So when they said, like this happened about 20 years ago, I'm like, oh, that makes sense because country styles are a little bit slower than what's popular elsewhere, especially 25 years ago. And yeah, and she was just walking down the highway, hands in her pockets, staring at the road. And when I turned around, like I leaned over and I said, "Hey, you can take this." And she just went and just shook her head at me. And I said, "Are you sure? Like, it's really raining. I really don't mind. I've got more." And she just kind of like did it again. Big gray eyes, but like she had color in her cheeks. She was a person. Um, and then she stood up and started walking away from me again. So I'm like, all right. It
That's
was wild.
wild.
It was wild. And it was the first time I'd had the experience where they say my blood ran cold. That's not how it feels. It feels like somebody is standing inside of your chest and they have a bucket of ice water and they just hurl it against the walls of your insides, and like everything is just like a shock of freezing cold ice in your veins. It's wild.
Once there was the realization that you there was no way that she could have like disappeared so quickly. And that kind of reaction hit you then that like but before you just thought you're dealing with like a person, it's their
Yeah, she looked like she was like, I mean, if I had to guess, she looked like she was like 17 to 19 and she just looked like a person. And I, I turned around, she was gone. I don't know what made me jump out of the car, but I screamed. I was like, "Holy shit." And I just got out and looked. And then when I realized how alone I was in this giant flat middle of the fields, nothing, and there was nobody around me, I got the most awful feeling crawling up over the back of my spine and over my scalp. And I just got in my car and drove away. And something happened in my brain where I just compartmentalized it so I could get through the next 4 hours teaching class.
man.
Yeah.
Man, the way you describe like in the book, I mean, it's like it's an interesting story, but to hear that it happened to you and to hear like how you felt and like what you saw and yeah, that kind of that gives me the chills. I think I was thinking of a Phantom Hitchhiker because it was kind of like a car was involved, and
Yeah, when
I
you
think
said
it
Phantom
still has
Hitchhiker,
that
I thought of one of those classic stories where the person picks them up and drives them to
like
their house, and when they get there, they were never
yeah,
there. That's why I
like
got
Resurrection Mary is the
yes.
classic one. Yeah,
Yeah. In North Carolina, we have Lydia who appears at a bridge in the western part we've actually got the guy who runs Carolina Haints and Rehab Productions, Dan Sellers. He actually got a myths and folklore roadside placard installed there last year. Um, and it's an old bridge where she still appears on rainy nights.
yeah, that's wild. That is some wild stuff.
Yep, but if
Uh,
anything, this gal did not want to ride, and I am grateful because I don't think I could have handled that very well.
whenever, when did it happen? Did they say that she died? Was there a specific year?
No, it was just kind of I filled up my gas tank
20
at the gas
years?
station. Yeah, but it wasn't like to the day or anything because it was a
Yeah,
homecoming. It was like we call that chapter homecoming because it was a football game
right.
evening. Um, and this was winter. This was, March. So it's not like it was the anniversary of her dying or anything. It was
Yeah.
like a Tuesday evening at 5 or something.
Do you do you have any thoughts, or have you thought about like why she would have appeared to you specifically?
Don't. Because I've had some times where I've seen some things and I really wonder if I was supposed to transmit a message or if I'm supposed to be a conduit. And the problem is I keep rejecting these situations where I like run away as fast as I can. I don't, if these people are trying to get me to help them, I'm really disappointing. But no, I don't. I don't know if, I don't know. I don't know. I like to be curious and I like to hear people's ideas about
Yeah.
what it means, but also I have had instances where I've been able to see things, and I say see with quotes because I know that what I'm seeing is or hearing is in my brain, but I'm still seeing it. I don't know if that makes sense. For example,
Like in your mind's eye, kind of
yeah. So,
idea.
for
Yeah.
example, 6 months ago, I was at my best friend's house and her mother died in the house. And I've never seen or experienced her mother there ever. Um, this might actually be a pretty private story. But I'd never seen or experienced her mother at the house. And other people had seen her mother after her mom died. Um, but they've renovated the whole house, and so it doesn't happen that often. And I'd heard some things about her mom that I'd never met her mom, but I heard some things about her that like I'm not sure if I would have gotten along with her. And clear as day, when I was there last April, I walked into the bathroom, which is the only part of the house that has not been renovated. And I wasn't expecting it. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. We've been hanging out. We're having a great time. Clear as day, I heard some other voice that I've never heard in my life say to me when I hit the door, "You got to quit judging me if you're going to come here and enjoy all my house and my wealth or
Mm,
enjoy my riches."
mm.
And first of all, I had to pee really bad. So I'm sitting there. I realize that I'm having a moment, but I'm also sitting there peeing and talking like, you know what? You are absolutely correct. I am so sorry. Like, that's a really valid point. But I didn't hear it. It wasn't in my ear. It was
It
just
wasn't
a
audible. Yeah. It was something
right,
that entered your mind. Yeah.
right. But there's no reason that thought would have just come to me in that voice, in that place, at that
Mm.
time when I wasn't thinking of her at all. Like I've been to my friend's house 100 times at this point, and it's not. a thing I think about.
Well, talk a little bit more about kind of what another one I picked was the Missing Mabel, the Terrible Creek. I guess
Yes.
this is a creek that runs through the town.
This is just a case of lore where we collected a folk story from the kids that grew up telling the story. And from the other locals who told about the moonshiners that would, run keep stills out there when there was nothing. Because okay, funny enough, the reason they actually call it Terrible Creek is because it's not a deep, easily defined creek. It tends to flood and spread out, so it's not every time it floods differently and it wrecks different properties, and it's kind of just a pain. And so that's when they started calling it Terrible Creek. But it's run from Johnson's Pond for more than 100 years, and it used to have a lot of moonshiners out there. And they do say that there's a Model T at the bottom of Johnson Pond that was part of a moonshiner gig gone bad. Um, but that story specifically is one that kids would tell to each other about. It's kind of a Bloody Mary-esque story, in which, you go out to the creek, you say the name of this little girl 3 times, you will get to see her out there looking for her mother.
Do people see her often out there, or is
I
it
don't know,
more just
there's
like a urban legend type of thing?
Well, it seems like it is one of those urban legend type things. And I'll be honest, nobody's tried it in about 40 years because it started being so developed. So the people that we got this story from were much, much older and like, oh, I remember going down and gigging and swimming in that hole all the time when I was a kid. But you can't really do that in most of Terrible Creek these days. So that's why, I don't know, we've gotten a lot of weird pushback from some elders on we had to join Facebook because that's where all the boomers are, and they're the ones with all the ghost stories and the history of the town. But a few people have come out of the woodwork to say, like, oh, this is all fiction. And we're like, well, first of all, do you not know what a legend is? Like,
Right,
a
right.
legend is a story. That's why we said legends and lore. Um, a lot of it is haunted history that when we say a date and we say a name and we say a fact, that's a fact. We did the research on it. But a lot of times we're just sharing the stories of the town that school kids used to tell each other 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that's one of them is the Mabel at the Creek story.
And I guess also too, I wrote down the Willow Springs axe murders.
That
Always good when
actually
there's an axe murder in the town.
Yeah, it's a really brutal one. It's actually so we actually have two true crime stories in the book that are horrible. And they sound made up. They're so bad, but they're provable and you can look them up. The one from the Willow Springs axe murder was Wake County's oldest quote unquote unsolved murderer, even though everybody knows the husband did it. Um, that was the one where the husband who lived out in Willow Spring had a wife that was pregnant and they were having trouble making ends meet, and he was a barrel smith and couldn't afford to have the baby that she was getting ready to have, and they already had a baby, and she went missing one night, and then it was found that her body had been dismembered and burned, as had that of their child, and then he went on the loose. And they say that it's unsolved because they never caught him. And there was a lot of back and forth, and there was, the whole town banded together to go out and try to find her bodies, and they found it in this awful swamp at the end of this dirt road that's still there. It's terrifying. And they found evidence of where he, dismembered his family in his yard. And they said that he would come back to town every few years and kind of just stay with family. And then that's where the next story comes from is there was a light in Willow Spring very near where he was for the last couple of years of his life. And a lot of horses and other animals would be afraid to go down this one road at night because this light would hang out there. And then the night that he died, a man was taking his horses home from the downtown tobacco market. He sold fish at the weekly market, and the light came right up to him and then calmed his horse down. It calmed him down, and then it went away, and nobody ever saw it since. And the rumor is that the man who murdered his wife and child died that night in a home just through the woods where that light was.
Hmm.
They have to
Yeah,
legally say that it's an unsolved murder because, he was never arraigned for anything, but
right.
everybody knew it's a small town.
Yeah, part of that story I found compelling was that, like, you know, the murders happened, and then I guess, obviously he skipped town, but then he would keep coming back, apparently,
Right,
and
because he
people
didn't
would
have
like
anywhere to
encounter
go.
him.
And it was believed that his father and family were absolutely helping him and covering for him a lot.
Also, too, there's the hidden ghost town.
Yeah. Now, I can't give you the whole book away.
No, well, I picked very few things, so this will be the last one we're going to talk about.
Yeah, this one is a cool one because I have seen the pieces of that town the whole time I've lived here. They're right there. The main old farmhouse is right on a main thoroughfare. It is now a very large pizza restaurant, and it is across the street from the family cemetery that is in the parking lot of a Food Lion and a Tractor Supply shop. And only when we started researching and interviewing the family that originally owned that big farmhouse did we learn about the entire plot of land that it was on and how it was a neighborhood that became a small township. It had its own post office, it had its own school out there, and it was an incorporated sub town that would have been a town. It was a town that was next to Fuquay Varina, but Fuquay Varina incorporated themselves in the 60s. And so this small ghost town, I'm getting the name wrong because I'm tired. It kind of just got absorbed into the bigger the Twin Cities.
Right. You mentioned something about Fuquay Varina that, like, that it's one of these places that was this kind of like this quaint little town, and now it's kind of been absorbed into the greater, I guess, Raleigh area. And you mentioned earlier before we started the interview that, like, it used to be 5,000 people, now it's up to like 50,000 people. So it's had like
Yeah.
an amazing amount. And then you talk about of people that have come in the last few years, and you talk about the terrible creek that people used to go down there, but now you really can't because now there's subdivisions all over the place.
Hmm.
With that kind of like disruption, is there, and because they always talk about, people do, and you've got this in the book, like, so people are doing renovations on their homes, and that stirs up activity, and there being more people there. Is there, would you say, is there an uptick of activity for that, or is it just that maybe more people are experiencing it because you've obviously got more population?
I don't know. A lot of our stories come from old timers that have been here a long time and say, you know, we don't hear these stories anymore, or this hasn't
Yeah.
happened to me in a long time. If anything, I think that the new energy coming in and the light pollution and the other frequencies that are disrupting things is kind of snuffing a lot of this stuff out. Like one of the stories in the book is about a haunted post office that became the haunted uh police station. And the picture in the book is one that I took from my cell phone, sorry, from my car with my cell phone while I was driving because I was going to go back the next day to get pictures of it. And by the time I got there the next day, they'd already started demolition on it. And it had been there for 40, 50 years.
Do you have a particular story that is like between what this book and the next book that is like your favorite?
I like all the ones from the Valentine-Spence, honestly. There's so many. facets to it, and there's so many theories, and the ghosts will let you know when they don't like somebody. For example, the most recent homeowner confessed to me that they have gotten a little violent with her, and have
Mm.
tried to throw her down the stairs. And that didn't happen to any of the other homeowners. Nobody else reported that. They're like, no, they're really kind, and we just sort of see them. But I was walking by taking pictures for the book, and they had some contractors working on the house, and the contractors were like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not like scoping this out to rob it. Like, I'm just doing research for a book." And they started like, "Oh, I knew there was something here," and they started to tell me something, and their supervisor came out, and they had to cut it short, and then I never saw him again. But I just think that a lot of these stories involve things that happened in the past, and that one still is very active and very just so intriguing. Like, what happened and what's going on there, and why are there some spirits that stay there and some spirits that pass through? I don't know. There seem like there's a man who we like to say in my ghost tour company, he made himself a ghost, and who's upstairs, and they hear him crying. Every family that's lived there that we spoke to hears him crying all the time. And why does he get to stay, but everybody else gets to pass through? It doesn't make any sense.
Tell us about your ghost tour company. When
Oh
people
yeah.
can go to the town and check it out.
Yeah, we run it through Octobers, and it's a whole theatrical performance. We have the Spookway players who act out ghost stories along the stops. We get to use the Fuquay Mineral Inn Garden as a amphitheater, and we do it this year. We're doing it the first, second, and fourth weekends in October, and it's a big deal. We sold out last year in the first 10 days of having it, so this year we've added a little bit more time and we're zhuzhing it a little bit, but it's not a super long tour. We're trying to figure out ways to build it up so that we can do maybe a pub crawl and we have, a van that transports people across town. But we mostly stick just to the downtown area. And I'll tell you, we do it in an hour and we only get 12 stories out of the way. And there are about six or seven more that we can't cover that are within eyesight of the route that we just don't have time to get to. Sorry, I have a kitten that's nibbling at me. Um, so yeah, that's what we do. We just started casting and rehearsals, and this year we've got some new stories and some new presentations. And the cool thing was we did the tour last year for the first time just to see how it was going to do, and we sold out super quick. But because we did the tour, so many people came to us and were like, "Oh, I used to live at a house on that route. Let me tell you that story." And now the route has been able to change because we've gathered so much information from last year. In fact, last year, and this is true, hand to God, last year on the night of the full moon, we had a couple hauntings that happened at one of the locations where we had actors where they thought I was playing a prank on them, and that was based on one of the stories that they were acting out. And I was like, oh, nope, that wasn't me. I've been busy running stage management. And then we also had a medium come on the tour who was able to confirm some of the things that we'd said, but she also was able to relay a message to one of our tour guides from a deceased relative that the tour guide, I saw her after the show and she was just, standing there and looked beatific and was just so happy. And she said, this medium just relayed to me an inside joke between myself and this deceased loved one. And it just kind of turned into this whole electric other thing where the audience became part of it. And my tour guides, some of them who weren't believers, got to have an experience. And same with my performers. So it's been this really cool collaborative thing.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. And you only do it, you're doing it's through October, and then after that it's like kind of a
Yeah, this
seasonal thing.
year, this year we're limiting it to just October, but we might try to see what happens if we broaden it out to doing it, just one tour guide just on the weekends. We didn't know if there'd be enough demand to keep it going year round, so having it once a year makes it a really special thing. And for the price, you get all of the performers and all of the venues that are open to us just for the special season. Whereas if we do it year round, we can't have a whole team of performers come out and rehearse year round for it. Not yet, anyway. When Fuquay is known as the most haunted small town in the South and everybody in the nation is raving about it, then we can hire a full-time actor staff.
Yeah. I think that would be great. I mean, it seems that like, it's definitely in the front running for it. Uh, for such a small place and to have so much going on. And I
Well,
commend you and your co-author for collecting all the stories.
thanks. Yeah, Kelly and I have done ghost tours our whole lives. And that was one of the things we said when we were talking about this was I have a brother who lives in New Orleans, so I've gone to at least five of their ghost tours. I'm from North Carolina, so I've done, Wilmington and we still want to get to Southport. I believe has one. No, that's not the one. I don't know. There's one that's amazing that's apparently out there. Kelly's done the Wilmington one. I've done the Charleston one. We've done Savannah and the big ones. We're like, our tour and our book has as many, if not more, ghost stories than these major southern cities that are so famous for it. I wonder what it looks like comparatively. And the other books that we've been able to find with as many stories as we have are about regions. And it took us a minute and we got really excited when we realized we're like, I think we might be it. I think we might be the most haunted small town in the whole South based on the amount of stories that we have. And also, we think that it's because of the spring and the ley lines here and the activity that got conjured onto Spring Street.
See, if you can push to get like the Chamber of Commerce or somebody or the mayor or whatever to just like to embrace that because there's so much of these like smaller towns, especially like West Virginia, like this picture behind me, the Flatwoods Monster, like
Yeah.
that little town that happened in uh Sutton, West Virginia is like really trying, I mean, they're trying to like, make the Flatwoods Monster their thing and be a
Oh,
tourist attraction
Point
and like Point
Pleasant.
Pleasant. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
Point Pleasant has taken off. And that was the interesting thing
Yeah.
is a lot of the people that live downtown that I interviewed were really, really wary. The woman who first renovated the Valentine-Spence house, when I first asked her that story 3.5 years ago, she gave me this whole big speech about like, you can't tell anybody this, it'll ruin the property value of the house. And then when I told her like how popular the ghost tours had been, she let us put her mom's pictures in the book and let us talk about it. She was like, I can't believe it. 40 years ago, we would have been laughed out of town and I would have lost my business and people would have thought I was crazy. And I'm like, yeah, the tide has turned on all of this in a lifetime, which is really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if like, through like these books and, the tour and like really like getting the town to embrace that would be, I think, would be excellent.
I
And
do too.
um, I know guys that are trying to do that in Somerset, Kentucky, not too far from where I am. I mean, you're trying to push that as like this weird paranormal place, and it is kind of a weird place. But just you know, I want to thank you for coming on, Liz. This has been a really great talking to you. I please tell people where they can find the book as well. And I'm assuming like with this, like you guys are selling this along. Like it goes really well with the tour, I'm sure.
Yeah. Thanks, by the way. It's been great being on this.
Oh,
So
thank you.
everything is on fvghosts.com or fuquayvarinaghosts.com or fuquayghosts.com. We're also at Oddly enough, we are at Fuquay Ghosts on Instagram and FV Ghosts on Facebook. And then you can just look up Fuquay Varina Ghosts on Amazon, and that'll get you the book. Um, you can also get our book at any of the Wake County public libraries and at the Library of Congress, which I'm probably too excited about because that little nerd kid that first started reading ghost story books at the library is that inner child is very excited that I get to pay it forward. So,
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. Where can people, find out about the tour and, and contact you if they need to?
Yeah. Again, that's all on our socials, FV Ghosts, and fvghost.com is where they can buy tickets. We try to keep it pretty. Oh, we also have a gift shop. All of it's on the site.
Nice. Well, Liz, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to just close out the show. Just guys, Strange Realities Conference is coming up here pretty soon. First weekend of November, November 1st and 2nd in Nashville, Tennessee, and online only on November 3rd. The whole thing is online, and those tickets are $70 for in-person ticket and online, and $30 for online only. So please get your tickets as soon as you possibly can. It would really help us out. And also, usual spiel, we have our Patreon if you guys want to check that out too. We will be doing pretty soon on October 9th since Kiki Dombrowski is not going to be able to do Strange Realities this year, she is going to be doing a thing on Halloween on October 9th, which is going to be our next online meetup. So guys, please check that out. But all right, well, I'm going to close out the show, and Sergio will be back next week. And guys, get your tickets for Strange Realities Conference, and we'll talk to you later.